Hello, my name is Dylan McCone, and this is my quick presentation on my experience in HCDE 313. Now, this wasn't my first foray into these techniques. Back in high school, I worked in the newspaper where I was first introduced to concepts like interviewing. Hopefully, I've grown a lot more since then, I'm sure. Interviewing and the other methods that we learned in this class have so many different forms, and a lot of the work that goes into user research is just finding out how to best ask your questions. What question are you trying to solve? What questions do you ask? How? Who? Etc. All of these impact the kind of response you're going to get from your participants. I've had other experience with user research in the past. I did a Mary Gay Research Symposium, and I worked at the daily newspaper, so I have some insight into interviews. But I noticed that the way you conduct interviews for a news article versus an opinion or a science article, and even for larger user research, it all varies. The form of it changes. All of these experiences just add up to the understanding that these are just tools, methods to gather information. They have to be refined, scoped, personalized to your goal, and there isn't like a steadfast, singular right way to do things. Every method's going to have its strengths and weaknesses. You just have to weigh the pros and cons to find out what your priorities are, what your study needs. 313 was structured around a single design question, and we conducted 3 different studies on it. My design question was looking at improving the experience of contactless food delivery for customers living in apartment buildings during the pandemic. This is because, like, for me and others in my building, which is in a locked apartment building, it was really inconvenient to get delivery, which is unfortunate. Sometimes people would follow me into the building behind me, and I hated it. Takeout's skyrocketing, and everyone's doing it now. So why is such a common experience so miserable to participate in? Now, I have here an image of the lobby where I did my field observations. And it's a great example of an issue that you run into with field observations is sometimes you run into ghost towns. There's like no one there. You have no control of what people doing. The first part of this project was eavesdropping, or as I talked about, field observations. I sat around my apartment building for a while and I confused people. The hard part was that sometimes people stood too far away and I couldn't hear them. But that's the thing about field observations. You can't like control the users. You just have to observe objectively what they're doing. Peer behavior really showed that like people just kind of like stand around and they're on their phone while waiting. People are really awkward. There was a lot of communication issues. But that was the main thing about field observations. You don't know why people make these choices. You just kind of, what do they do? They're on their phone. Okay. And you have to extrapolate from there. Interviews was supposed to pick up the slack of the field observations, which were purely behavioral. This was a case where you can get the motivation, the perspective from the person. It does take away a little bit of the benefit of field observations where they have no idea you're there or taking notes, and so they act more naturally. But it helps that, this non-wild version can give you clarity. My interviews found a lot of issues with communications. People were anxious and annoyed with being informed about the process in different ways they wanted it to happen. I was even finding that many of the other core values, including like food condition, were being impacted by communication issues. So like food is being left outside and getting cold because no one knew it was there. Like that's an issue. The last part was a survey, which was prime for reaching a larger audience and getting a lot of data in variable forms. I geared this whole thing towards communication issues since that was really big before. Turns out writing multiple choice questions are really hard. They're great for large population data analysis, but it necessitates a good amount of leading, which is a really fine balance to walk. People care about communication. That was the result of my survey, which thank goodness. ETAs were in particular a main component for this. What really interested me about these results was that you compare the different questions to find out what people are willing to put up with to meet certain needs. So like people are willing to deal with some inconveniences as long as certain boundaries aren't crossed. Now let's talk about all the things I did wrong, and there was a good amount. In field observations, my mere existence was problematic. My being in that space, which wasn't that large, made people behave differently, even if they didn't know I was taking notes. With interviews, I was speaking with friends who I've talked with for a long time, and that changed the way I asked questions. An example of this would be I knew they had some information that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to get them to say it, but I couldn't lead them to it. I had to pretend they're a stranger. With surveys, this leading was still a problem. In writing multiple choice questions, as I brought up, you like can't tell them the answer, but you do have to give them options for answers. So it's a very fine line. I have, unfortunately, very little experience with data analysis, especially with mixing quantitative and qualitative data. So the analysis stage in this class was definitely helpful, just exercising that thought process. When does interpretation turn into making up meaning? What kind of data can be effectively pivoted and compared to create meaning? So analysis was a major component. Another major component was about planning for these studies. In defining my research question based on the types of different studies that I'm doing and discussing when those methods are most useful, it really helped me in considering how different methods are useful in different circumstances. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, it's about weighing the pros and cons of these different tools. The exercise and debate and ethical considerations is the main takeaway of this course for me. With each stage of this project, I found new issues, new solutions, new issues that broke those solutions, and the solutions for those issues, and then on and on and on. This really drove home for me that there aren't simple universal answers. We are constantly iterating, and we have to pull from really large populations and diverse groups to address that. If we don't work with our users, we're not going to be able to find the next solution. In the future, I want to go into user research because I firmly believe that bringing diversity into design and then bringing diverse needs into our products has to start in the research phase. Data is driving everything right now. And so working with our users to pinpoint needs is vital to prove, in the least, that this is relevant and needed work. While I can't say I'm about to solve the delivery breakdown, I learned a lot in this project. It was a lot of fun, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to stretch my thinking, pick up some new functional skills, and then have great conversations and debates about the ethics of user research. That's going to be what I take with me. Those questions of what are we capable of? What can we do with this?